Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the employer of record in the context of hiring contingent workers across Europe. This call is being recorded. It will be shared with you after the event. And we do have time today for questions at the end. So please don't be shy, add them into the question sections, I think on the below right-hand side, and we'll do our best to answer them in the time that we have today. But if any further follow-up is required, then obviously we'll arrange that too. So welcome. Well, let's start with the introductions, and I'll start with myself. My name's Tracy Stanton. I'm SVP for Client Services at Magnet Global, and I'm going to be your host today. I've over 20 years experience in human capital management, total talent management. There are many buzzwords for our field, but I joined Magnet in 2022, so just over a few years ago. I was impressed by the kind of breadth and depth of the services that Magnet provides today, but more importantly, kind of the thought leadership and these type of conversations that happen in the contingent worker space, and that desire to disrupt and kind of stay ahead and stay relevant. And I'm joined here today, I'm delighted to be joined by Taylor Wessing, a really like-minded international law firm. This isn't the first time we've worked together. And I'd like to welcome Johannes Simon. Johannes is partner of the employment group at Taylor Wessing in Germany, who advises his clients primarily around HR compliance, as well as flexible and contingent workforce solutions. So welcome, Johannes.
Thank you.
Plus Bart, and now I'm going to say this wrong, Bart Hunekens, also a partner at Taylor Wessing, but from the Netherlands. And Bart advises global companies on expanding into the Netherlands, into the region. How did I do, Bart?
Thank you, Tracy. That was perfect. Not bad at all, no.
Thank you. And lastly, Jeff Patton, who leads Magnet's client EOR payroll operations. And Jeff oversees the whole global operational delivery for not just payroll, but benefits, the ongoing worker experience, and ongoing business transformation. So welcome, Jeff. It's over in the US time zone, so a little earlier for you today, but welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you all for being here today, and we do look forward to hearing your insights. So look, but just to get us started, let's understand a little bit more about Magnet. So I'll pass to you in a moment, Jeff, and then maybe Johannes, you can tell us a little bit more about Taylor Wessing. So Jeff, talk to us about Magnet.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tracy. First of all, I'm just really excited to be part of a global organization whose culture is so laser focused on being results driven in our solutions. Using our integrated workforce platform, where we understand that our clients' extended workforce is a strategic asset that must be managed, efficiently, proactively, and holistically. Our innovative software serves as a system of record connecting businesses with the talent they need where the talent exists. Our products and services are powered by real-time data and intelligence that enables hiring the right talent at the right time, at the right cost. This is all achieved through multiple channels, all of the channels, including our employer of record, our EOR product, to fit the unique needs of our clients in markets across the world.
Thanks, Jeff. And Johannes, what about Taylor Wessing? Tell us a bit more about your group.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, as Taylor Wessing, we're an international full-service law firm. Our main locations are in the UK, then Central and Eastern Europe, as well as Asia. And one of our focus groups is employment. It's a fast growing group, both nationally and internationally. So when I started back in 2015, I came as a lateral. We were about, 30 to 40. We have doubled to 60 in Germany, and internationally we are about 125 employment lawyers at the moment. So it's a big group. And one area of specialty is our international task force on contingent workforce solutions and HR compliance. It was founded back in 2015. At that time, Barcelona had won the Champions League in football. So we called it Project Barcelona, using a football metaphor here.
And I think to add to that, Johannes, so Tracy, our sweet spot as a firm is working for overseas clients and helping them set up and run their business in Europe. So that links up nicely with the topic of today as well.
Thank you, Bart. Thank you. And as for Project Barcelona, did I hear you may need to swap names now after?
Yeah, I don't know. So over the last 10 years, they haven't been too dominant. But after yesterday, when they beat Munich 4-1, maybe they're back on track. So maybe we will stick to the name. Yeah.
Well, listen. Thank you so much. I think, we're in great hands. And in preparation for this call, I did some kind of research myself. I went to look at, the macro trends that we're seeing. And there's a lot of data out there that we can reference. But there were three that I thought were kind of relevant for our discussion today. Firstly, this first one on the left, according to McKinsey, where we're seeing a global increase in investments across Europe by 33% in both 2022 and 2023. This is compared to previous years, and we've seen the shift into Europe, maybe from other regions such as China and Russia. And companies are continuing to see the value in that global expansion. They're looking for resilience in uncertain times, and they're looking obviously for new territories to boost their growth. Organizations are looking to adjust their operations. They want to access new customer bases and, as I say, diversify those market risks. And what really resonated, I think, for today's call was really the rise of the remote worker and this shift in strategies. Companies are looking to tap into international talent, in a simple way. They can get access to more diverse skills, reduces the dependency maybe on local markets, and it makes talent acquisition, more competitive globally. So companies are more and more willing to hire, as we know, remote workers from different countries, but they need to find the best fit, and they need to know that they're doing that compliantly. And I think that kind of plays into this conversation. The second one, really, from McKinsey, no surprise, 90% of organizations have identified skills gaps. This is particularly noticeable in IT, manufacturing, healthcare, where we're seeing some of the most acute shortages. But a lot of that's due to this rapid technological advancements and how the actual job roles are evolving. So, organizations are having to have proactive strategies to fill the gap. So they're either looking internally at how they're upskilling, or they're looking at new markets for talent. Again, plays in directly into this conversation. And I suppose finally from Gartner, the decrease in budgets, we're all feeling it, and year on year, that number is not improving. So HR budgets are becoming tighter. We've got economic uncertainty, the rising operational costs, and really the need for us to do more with less. So prioritizing spending and focusing on cost-efficient initiatives is a priority. And those stats have real meaning. As SVP of Client Services, as a service organization, I know and I feel that those impacts every single day. Last week, if we make it very topical to Europe, Germany, one of Europe's largest economies, announced it's seeing its second consecutive year of recession. I live here in the UK, which seems, it's reporting a little bit more resilience. GDP is forecasted to grow by 1.1%, but I read the news this morning and, that's being downplayed to more like 0.9%. So just the news compounds. So it's not just, US organizations coming into Europe, but also companies in region are looking to find alternative ways to hire talent, save costs, but it's a legislative complex landscape. So, Bart, when it comes to European trends in Europe, what do we need to look out for? What should we be thinking about?
Thank you, Tracy. So first thing that comes to mind is obviously the high degree of regulation in Europe, especially mainland Europe, but also in the UK, especially given the most recent published employment rights bill, particularly in relation to flexible and contingent labor. If we, for instance, look at the Netherlands, there are a lot of strict rules and regulations on flexible labor, on the number of successive fixed-term contracts that an employer can enter into before it turns into a permanent employment contract by virtue of law. There's lots of rules and regulations on working with on-call or zero-hour contracts, as well as is being introduced in the UK now through that employment rights bill. Johannes, anything to add for Germany?
Yeah, well, as for Germany, certainly, well, although it's regulatory trends that come from the EU, Germany nevertheless remains the master of regulation and bureaucracy, to put it in a bit of a sarcastic tone, although I have some good news at the end of the slide. I'll keep it till then. But at first, yeah, so law on contingent workforce, the German Temporary Agency Act, AUG, last big overhaul was in 2017, was really limiting the flexibility of customers when using temps. So we now have a maximum lease period of 18 months. We have a license requirement, equal treatment requirement, to which we come later. Then the hurdles were further stretched by courts and authorities, for example, which is always relevant when it comes into play whether contingent workforce is hired via a temp solution or a SOW solution, is the question of classification, misclassification. There was a lot of case law on this, really increasing risk for customers, making it really complex. So you really need a good compliance solution here. And then the Federal Employment Agency, which is the supervising authority on the law regarding temps, have just published its new directions, fachliche Weisungen in German, on the execution of the German temp agency law. And they have now announced that they want to expand the geographical scope to situations where a contingent worker is working remotely outside Germany, but virtually integrated into a client's team based in Germany. So that is probably applying in particular to IT developers working remotely, and that the German law might apply to such situations. I'm quite sure this is targeted at EOR organizations that are not located in Germany, not having a German license, in order to prevent circumventions here.
And I think on top of that, there's the high protective standards throughout, especially mainland Europe. For instance, if we look at the Netherlands, sometimes we refer to it as the exact opposite of at-will employment. You can only terminate employment agreements as an employer unilaterally through court, basically. Not sure if that's the same way in Germany, Johannes. I think it's a little bit more flexible, but still relatively a high protective standard.
Yeah, we do have a high protective standard. So from when a business has more than 10 employees and the employment relationship has lasted more than 6 months, any employee is subject to a so-called general dismissal protection, and meaning you can only terminate employment for a reason, either like a business-related, person or conduct-related reason. So as you say, the opposite of employment at will. And then we have special protection for certain groups, e.g. certain special offices, works council members, or employees on parental leave, for example, where you need an authority to consent before, or where you can only terminate employment for cause.
An employment lawyer's paradise. And then there's, on top of that, the high administrative effort which is increasing as well. So if we look at, for instance, in Europe, there's the Pay Transparency Directive coming up, which includes some sort of reporting obligations on diversity and gender ratios, as well as pay. And for instance, in the Netherlands, we already have reporting obligations in place for carbon footprint of employees. Johannes?
Same with us, a lot of these, yes. Yeah. EU directives having to be implemented into national law with reporting obligations, documentation obligations, a lot of formalities. And I think it's particularly a burden for mid-sized companies that do not have their own legal or compliance departments. The thresholds in Germany are quite low. So most of these laws and regulations already apply when a business has 50 or more employees, which is still quite a small business that really doesn't have a lot of overhead functions. And then here comes the good news, at least. We have just seen a new draft bill that Germany wants to reduce bureaucracy and administrative effort to some extent. And it again applies to the law on temps. Up to now, the agreement to be concluded between a client and a temp agency on the leasing of employees, there was a wet ink requirement by law. Sometimes electronic signatures were used, and it was accepted by the Federal Employment Agency if it was the highest degree of electronic signature. They tended to accept that, but now a text form like email, fax, scan will be sufficient according to the new law. And I think especially if you work internationally with big staffing organizations located in the UK and the US, and you have international clients that you can now just exchange documents via email. No more FedEx overnight for documents to be sent.
Well, you said it was, groundbreaking news, Johannes. So I think moving to electronic signatures and email is a big shift. But seriously, it will have a big impact.
But for Germany, that's almost like a small revolution. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, look, it's fair to say it's complicated, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the differences that you see legislatively. But so with companies, against that background, companies looking for new strategies for not just hiring, but for growth. One of them is obviously finding the right skills, but remaining compliant. I know that keeps kind of the C-suite up at night, is, that compliance factor. Jeff, what role does EOR play here? But perhaps firstly, what is an employer of record? Maybe we should start there.
Yeah, absolutely. An employer of record, commonly referred to the acronym EOR, provider, is a third-party service provider that legally employs workers on behalf of another company based on country. Employer of records become the legal employer for a population of a company's workforce, taking on all of the employment-related responsibilities, such as onboarding, payroll, benefits administration, required compensation reporting based on country and regulation, tax filings, and offboarding, all while maintaining compliance with local labor laws.
Okay, so that's what it is. What are the most common kind of use cases or challenges that people see?
Absolutely. I do want to point out, the differences in EOR services companies when it comes to managing a full-time workforce versus the contingent workforce. Magnet specializes specifically in the contingent workforce space and has so for 30 plus years with knowledge and experience, all backed by our cutting edge technology. So there really is a difference between the two. Some of the common use cases for contingent EOR services are really, when I think about it, it's international hiring and expansion. So commonly referred to as land and expand. Adhering to the ever evolving compliance with local labor laws and regulations around the world. And then, thirdly, scaling operations quickly in markets, where the need is to find that right talent. I think some of the challenges that come along with that kind of play into the use cases, right? It's navigating those complex regulations, local labor laws, and that constantly shifting and changing environment around the world. Adhering to payroll and tax compliance around the EOR service, as well as managing the risk and liability with that workforce, depending on jurisdiction.
Yeah, so although, it seems like a simple service, the wrapper around it and actually finding the right partner is going to be key. Johannes, you mentioned some of the key differences earlier, kind of in that overview that we're looking out for, but anything else you'd want to reference, some of the key differences across Europe that we need to be conscious of?
Yeah, I think there's going to be 4 topics we want to talk about today. This is the question, what is EOR? What is an EOR solution in the respective local law? Is there a license requirement for an EOR in the respective country? Are there any limitations as to how long someone can be deployed to a customer via an EOR? And are there any other specialties like equal treatment? So let's start with the nature of EOR. In Germany, it is always a temp solution because you say someone is hired by the EOR remains the formal employer, but the right to issue directions are transferred to the customer for the time of deployment. The person is integrated into the customer's organization, working with the customer's team. So that's a classic temp model in Germany. What about the Netherlands part?
It's the same for the Netherlands. So I know in Germany it is sometimes referred to as employee leasing.
Right.
We're not familiar with that term in the Netherlands, but de facto it would mean the same in the Netherlands. We don't have the concept of dual employmentship, so the employees will be formally employed by the EOR and seconded more or less to the end clients, to the hirer.
Yeah, so I'm not a UK legal expert, but I understand that employee leasing is also not a common terminology in the UK, but they do have like a concept of employment businesses in the UK, and that they do have something like a conduct of employment agencies and employment businesses regulations under which an EOR might fall. I think it's not an automatism as it is in Germany, like by design, but I think at least there's a possibility, to my understanding. Yeah, so next one, license requirement. So since in Germany, EOR is a temp solution, a temp agency must obtain a license from the Federal Employment Agency in order to lease employees, as we call it in Germany. So all the EORs do have, for example, like Magnet, they do have a German limited liability company registered in Germany, having a German AUG license in order to do EOR business. It's not rocket science to obtain such license. It's normally 3 months application period, costs about 1,500 euros, and then the license in the first 3 years is term limited for 1 year. Then you get an annual audit by the employment agency whether you are a so-called commercially trustworthy business partner. complying with all the laws and regulations. And then if there's no major complaints after 3 years, you get an unlimited license. And then the audits are only taking place about every 3 years, or if there's any particular complaint. So what about the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands, you don't need a license to practice an EOR. It is recommended to obtain a certificate from the Labor Standards Foundation, and if you want to work with a separate G account in the Netherlands, it's mandatory to have such a certificate. But you don't need a license. You do need to register as a company that is posting workers in the Dutch Trade Register, but that's just an application you need to fill out and send in to the Trade Register. But you don't need a license, at least yet, to practice an EOR in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, there's also no license regime in the UK. So yeah, and I think that's, at least in Germany, the biggest limitation to EOR, maximum lease period of 18 months. So that was introduced with the 2017 AUG overhaul. So after 18 months, a deployment must be ended, and then you need a cooling down period of 3 months and 1 day at least, until you could start again. One option that is possible, if a client has another entity, you could switch to the other client entity if there's a need for it. But if the person carries out the same work on the same workplace, in fact, it's still maybe a circumvention, but at least the switch of client entities is not expressly legally prohibited, whereas a so-called carousel of employers of records, if the employer of record would have another entity, that is circumvention, and that is expressly prohibited by law.
That's not necessary in the Netherlands, I would say. So we don't have that maximum term of 18 months. In fact, we don't have a maximum term at all. So in principle, you could use an EOR to employ an employee for an indefinite period of time. And the same goes for the UK. Unlike Germany, they don't have any maximum term as well.
To my knowledge, in the UK, there is no maximum period. However, what I've learned from my UK colleagues is that the longer an employee is employed by an EOR, but working for an end user, the greater the risks that after at least several years that someone would find that they're actually employed by the end user then. But there's no clear cut or cut-off date here.
No.
I think some of the new bill will be trying to clarify that, but you know, that's a webinar in its own right at the moment.
Yeah. Well, last topic that I would have here is the so-called principle of equal treatment. That so under German law, a temp worker has to be treated in the same way as a comparable client worker from the first day. There is one exception that is used by most temp agencies and EORs. They refer to certain collective bargaining agreements of the contingent staffing sector, and that exempts you from this equal treatment principle. And so then for the first 9 months, you are free to apply your own remuneration regime under these collective bargaining agreements. And then after 10 months, then there's an equal pay requirement, but no entire equal treatment requirements. And I'd say 90 to 95% of the industry and the staffing sector is making use of this exemption, because like equal treatment is just really difficult to match, because sometimes there is no comparable employee, and then you have to look at how would a fictitious comparable employee be treated. So yeah, so a door of entry for many compliance issues again.
Yeah, we see the same system in the Netherlands. It doesn't lead to a lot of litigation, I must say. So to a certain extent, it seems to be relatively easy for EORs to find either a real employee or a fake employee to compare to. I think one exception in the Netherlands that stands out is that I think it was about 18 months ago, there was an obligation introduced for EORs to offer employees a reasonable pension on itself. So that's apart from the equal treatment of the employees.
Okay. All right. Bart, Johannes, any more you want to add there? No?
No.
Well, I think really proving that it's a very complex landscape. And I know we were really referencing the Netherlands and Germany, but there are many other places to land, obviously across EMEA, that there are more variances to consider. And Jeff, I know some of the services you've been providing are more global across all of EMEA. Sorry, global and across EMEA. Could you give us an example where someone's maybe used Magnet for an EOR, if not in these countries, but beyond? Oh, you're on mute, Jeff. I wondered if we were going to be able to say that at least once during this webinar.
Well, there you go. There's one. No, I appreciate it. I can think of three, I think, good examples of clients that we've served and how we've benefited, or they've benefited from using our product and our services. So the first one is an international food and beverage organization. When we started with them, they had 2 to 3 workers with extremely fast moving business requirements that were forcing them to scale very quickly. And so utilizing our technology and our EOR product, we were able to deliver through our direct sourcing service, hiring just under 100 specialized workers for their organization, contingent workers for their organization in both UK and Ireland in just under 2 months. So the ability to kind of expand quickly, land and expand in those markets, I think that's a really good example. The second example, I'd like to highlight is a very large global technology company that we have a long-standing partnership and work with just under around 2,000 contingent workers in markets all around the world. We've really partnered with them to leverage our platform and our products, enabling the organization to shorten very complex onboarding processes that previously were taking months to manage to just under 2 weeks. Our ability to navigate the contingent worker classification and local labor laws allowed them and us to have more agility in addressing their needs to scale, while also finding the right talent compliantly and efficiently. And then the third example that I can think about that's good in this context is a global pharmaceutical organization, and very relevant to this conversation: Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland. This business came to us with a need of 10 very specialized, very specific senior roles that they were looking for and to source. Through our global network and platform, we were able to source the exact niche talent they needed in the markets where that talent existed, all while maintaining and managing the complex requirements, thus allowing our client to focus on their business needs and objectives all at the same time. So, I think those are 3 good examples of leveraging an EOR service and the benefits.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and some really great insights. And so the difference between having, land and expand fast, I think you said 100 specialized workers in under a couple of months, the large global technology where we're partnering globally to maybe even find talent in the first instance, where to go, where are the skills, and the third one where the company had identified the key skills they were after, new territories that they weren't present. So how did we help them? I think three really great examples. And I know the wrapper of the worker experiences is key there as well. So I do want to open up for questions, because we have got some through and we're coming into this kind of last 10 minutes. But like a last thought from you, if we pull everything we've heard together, what do you think people on the call, what can their organizations be doing in the future to find the right talent in Europe, mitigate that risk in all of those situations? So Johannes, shall we start with you?
Okay, so from my point of view, there's two issues primarily. So it's be aware of the local regulations in the target jurisdictions, ensure compliance with the local laws, which laws are applicable, what do I have to have in mind. The second is look for EOR partners with representation in the respective country. If that is required, that they have a local entity, check whether they fulfill the requirements. For example, as for Germany, you can check whether someone has an AUG license or not online in the register. Yeah, Bart, anything to add from your side?
I think if adding anything to this would be maintain flexibility, be agile. I think that is something that I would want to stress. Looking at my practice, I still see a lot of social butterflies, talent moving from one country to another. And I think as an employer, it's important to maintain that flexibility.
And Jeff, a final thought from you?
Yeah, I think it's really starting and finishing with the end-to-end, worker experience is kind of the core emphasis through from an operational delivery perspective. I mean, making sure that we're leveraging technology and data. We're finding the right partner to leverage technology and data for talent sourcing. Kind of leading some of the examples I highlighted earlier. Building relationships with those local talent networks and really finding a partner that's vendor neutral to source that talent. I think focusing on compliance, is paramount from day one. As we engage with workers and source workers all the way to employing and offboarding them. And then, as Bart referred to, mentioned is implementing the agile workforce strategies, right? And to enable us to be mobile and finding talent where talent exists for the needs of the business.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all three, Jeff, Johannes, Bart. We have got some questions. So let's jump over to them. We've got kind of 6 or 7 minutes left to the end. So I'm just going to read them out verbatim. Some I think we may have covered in some of your answers. So this is specific for the Netherlands. Can the employer move existing staff members with permanent contracts to an employer of record solution?
That's a good question. Generally speaking, I would say that you would need the employee's consent for that. So I'm doubting whether this could be a unilateral decision from the employer's side, unless you have compelling business reasons for doing so. So I would assume consent would be needed, but there might be exceptional circumstances in which you would be able to do this unilaterally.
Okay, thank you, Bart. And we have talked a lot today about Netherlands, Germany, and the UK, and this is a valid question. Which country is admin and compliance heavy or needs to be focused more in Europe? For example, Romania, Poland, or any other country?
As far as I know, for Poland, they also are quite similar to Germany in terms of that EOR is deemed temporary employment, and they have this principle of a temporary employment agency, and they also have a registration or license requirement in order to offer EOR services. So you need to be registered with their National Register of Employment Agencies. So I'd say, for example, in Eastern Europe, Poland, to my knowledge, is more compliance heavy, as you would say it. then I don't know. I think Bart, you can confirm that generally France has very high protective standards with regard to employment laws generally. So this is what I always point out to when people complain about Germany. I always point to France.
Confirmed, yeah.
Well, having lived there for 3 years and worked, I can confirm it's a complex place to work. So one of our first questions early on, we may have touched on, we've definitely touched on some of this around length and renewals, but let's ask it anyway. What is the contract between the EOR and the client? Is it a service agreement or a contingent workforce agreement? And the second part is, are there any restrictions on length and renewals of these contracts? Which I think you maybe touched on earlier, but who wants to take that?
I can take it from a Dutch perspective. So in the Netherlands, it would be seen as a service agreement, and there would not be any restrictions in place on renewals. So these could be renewed permanently.
Okay.
In Germany, it's always a temp agreement, the EOR and the client. Normally, you have a framework agreement on the general terms, how to provide EOR services, and then you have a so-called individual agreement on the lease of a respective worker that could, in principle, also be unlimited, but of course it would make sense to link that to the maximum lease period. But the AUG agreement is still a commercial agreement between two parties.
Okay, thanks, Johannes. And this was one about maybe some new legislation coming up. So if you hire a Dutch employee via a Dutch EOR provider to work for a German company in Germany, I understand that this falls under the German Act on the temporary agency work, the German Act of Temporary Agency Work. Is that correct?
If that person is subject to directions from Germany and interacting with the German workforce virtually, for example, participating in Teams meetings, Scrum meetings for a developer, things like that, according to these new fachliche Weisungen, the directions on the AUG, this is now thinkable, yes. And until 15th of October, where these directions were published, it was not. So that's a big change now that you at least have to consider. But there must really be some degree of, there must be directions coming from the German client and this working with the team. But the territorial scope is certainly expanded now, yeah.
Okay. And there's still questions are still coming in. So if I have not answered your question, we will come back to you. But one more's just come in. Can the employer transfer workers from one EOR to another?
In Germany, they cannot, in order to lengthen the 18 months period as stated. So that would be deemed a circumvention. They can switch to another client entity.
Okay.
So yes, and I think,
so that is asked here again. The switching of the client entity is possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think,
then after 18 months, you can rotate. Sorry. Yeah, I read the question. It's quite long. So yeah, you could, for example, we just had that question, like two engineers being deployed to two different companies of a company group. And then after 18 months, the engineers coming via a temp switch positions, and they do that on and on again. I don't know whether after a certain while, someone would say you cannot do it forever, but at least up to now, you can do it.
I've had a similar question come in again about switching the 18 months. But look, I think what it proves is that, having a partner such as Taylor Wessing or Magnet by your side to kind of navigate what is a kind of complex landscape, it really is essential. We're at time, unfortunately. We're kind of bang on Q2. This recording will go out, and any additional resources. As I said, we haven't answered your question, we will come back to you. But look, in the meantime, look, there's the websites are there. Please go and visit how Magnet can help you optimize kind of your compliance, payroll, benefits, maximize the worker experience, or obviously for Taylor Wessing on compliance, your contingent workforce, and both for kind of expanding into EMEA. So thank you again, panel. It's been great fun preparing for this and doing some research, and obviously meeting you all. And thank you to everyone for attending today. Your questions, very insightful. And please look out for the recording. Otherwise, have a great morning, rest of your day or evening. Thank you.